Well, today we're going to have some fun. I like to show various different pictures I've taken over. I've always got a camera with me, and I'm always either my phone or the camera I carry with me in my truck. And whenever I can safely do so, I'll take a picture. And I usually have things to say about this. Here's one that I took just yesterday. It's really something, whenever a vehicle is crashed pretty bad. This one here looks like it got rear-ended, and I don't know what the aftermath was, other than the fact that incidentally, this is my mirror over here. It's amazing how it looks like it's part of the car, but this is the mirror on my truck. But if they can drive it, they will keep driving it and make whatever use bungee straps to keep the trunk closed or whatever, and put red tape on the lights and stuff. If the light will still burn, they still drive it. And if the crumple zone took everything and it didn't cause any kind of alignment issues or anything like that, and it still goes, they can drive it. I had another picture of a Buick out there by Dr. Country Store that was just totally wiped out all down one side, and it looked like when it rained, it just rained all in the car and everything. But just keep on driving those things if they'll go. It's just a box on wheels anyway, Now, this bothers me when I see something like this. This is on a truck that I saw at the drive-thru. I was sitting over there at an angle where I could get a picture of the headlight. And these sealed beam headlights, they're supposed to be in there so that all of this stuff is straight and not at an angle. And they've even got little bumps on the light, so they're supposed to sit in that bucket straight. But for some reason, the guy managed to mount this one crooked. And I guess it still worked, but that just bugs me. If you don't like seeing a crooked picture on the wall, that bothered me something terrible. Now, this is the sequential turn signal. See how these cams would operate this thing in these older cars. This was like a '69 Cougar, and every time you saw these in the older Fords, on the Thunderbirds, or on any of the vehicles like the Shelby Mustangs and stuff that were using these kind of turn signals, they would have this motorized cam in there that was operating these points. And it kind of looked like this, and they actually had to have some special circuitry so that it would override this and turn the stoplight on, if you had your foot on the brake and that kind of thing, or using flashers. But you notice the cam it was flat on one side, and it was designed to, as this shaft whirled, it was designed to keep those those points closed from these. It would hold them open when this side of the cam. Whenever it was on the flat side of the cam, it would hold them. It would let them close, and then it would operate the lights. But they were operating sequentially, and that's how it would do. Of course, a lot of vehicles nowadays have got this kind of thing, and this is how we do it in the 21st century. We got a module that sends signals out like that. But even on some of the Mustangs that didn't have sequential lights, the GEM module was still sending the signal out to these three lights on three separate wires, even though it wasn't programmed to have sequential tail lights. And I ran into that one time when I was at the college, and this girl came and she says, one segment of my 2006, if I remember right, she had a Mustang, and she said, one segment of my stoplight stays on all the time. And I said, well, and it was on the right side of the car. And I said, well, let's see if we can figure out what's going on there. And so I went out there, and after I got through with my troubleshooting, it turned out that the driver inside this module had turned on, I think it was on this side. It wasn't on the left, it was on the right. That one inner segment was on all the time, really bright. And she said, that's going to kill my battery. And I said, yeah. I said, that's true. And then that one wire coming all the way from the module was doing that. She didn't even have these sequential lights. But I said, let's go ahead and take the bulb out of this one. If it in my car, I would just go ahead and just cut this wire and scotch lock these together, so when you master brake or use a turn signal, they'd all come on together, because he didn't have the sequential ones. And so she did that. She said, well, how much would it cost to get this straightened out? And I said, well, whenever I did the research, it was that gym module was going to have to be replaced. You know, there's an outside chance she could have a short power somewhere on this wire. And I said, well, let's go ahead and check that. So it was $400 and something by the time you bought this and programmed it and all that stuff. And she said, well, I guess I'll need to save up money for that. And I said, wait a minute, is having that one light working worth $400 to you? You need to think that through, you know. I mean, you can do whatever you want to, it's your car, but I don't know if I'd want to, if I was a college student struggling to get by, I don't know if I would want to drop $400 at something that you could do without, at least for a while, you know. Anyway, workarounds. People do all kinds of stuff to work around a problem that they've had. Now this one right here, I don't know if the wiper blade would no longer go on this wiper arm or what the deal was, but I noticed I was at the grocery store one day when I got out of my truck. I saw this, somebody wrapped a rag around this to keep it from scratching the windshield any worse than it already had. And so when they turned on the wiper, they could see just fine because they had a wiper blade on the other side, but they felt like, well, they didn't need this one. Either they didn't want to put blades on it, or the blade wouldn't stay, or they didn't know how to change it, or it kept coming off. I don't know what the deal was on that. Another thing that was kind of interesting, I thought on some of the Crown Victorias, and maybe on some other videos, I've only seen it on Crown Victorias. You may have a wiper blade that doesn't clean the glass where it flip, like there's something wrong with the wiper blade, and you put another wiper blade on it, and it still gives you a screwed up, you know, wiping pattern. Dad's car did this. I saw one of the state cars at college do this. And you can't really see anything wrong with anything other than the fact that even a new wiper blade won't clean the glass. And the way that you fix that is replace the entire wiper arm. And so I got a whole brand new wiper arm and held it up next to the one that was on it, and it looked exactly the same. But when I put the wiper arm on it with a new blade, it cleaned nice and smooth. And that was just really strange. I can't explain that, but I've seen it a couple or three times on Crown Victoria. And this guy right here, you can go to the parts store, and I don't know, this doesn't look like it's damaged around this light, but you can go to the parts store and one of these square body Chevy trucks, they can order you a replacement light assembly for this thing for like $17 or something like that. That's what it was last time I checked. This guy right here defaulted red tape. You know, a lot of people will get red tape and they'll tape up a light, you know, to be compliant with traffic laws and all that. Sometimes there'll be some damage that will cause that glass to be broken out, and they'll just do all this fancy tape work and plastic and all that. Now driving this car and seeing what's going on behind you is going to be pretty dicey. But if you need the wheels and you don't have the money to replace the rear glass, I guess, you know, or to fix the door where it'll take rear glass or replace the door or whatever, I think I'd be looking at a salvage yard if possible to see if I could find a whole door that had glass in it. Anyway, I see this kind of stuff all the time. Side windows taped up, back windows taped up, all that kind of thing. And that's one workaround that I've seen there. On this Honda, like, I don't know how much, this would be a large amount of cash if you obviously wouldn't hire something done with that. This guy right here was very original. I see this thing driving around town sometimes. It's pretty cool. He's got these truck mirrors that on both sides that he put on his little Toyota. And it's funny looking as all get out, but man, he can see what's out there. He's just got to be careful when he parks next to a car, or he's liable to drag his mirrors along there. Of course, it looks like these are the ones that you can click, you know, push in and pull out and all that kind of stuff. But he wants to know what's behind him for sure. I've seen this car more than once, and it's really interesting how people will do this. This looks like something, you know, that I would have done back in my early redneck days. And this person here's another tape job, you know. Now this is hard to parse what's going on here. What are you trying to fix? Because this glass is not broke. And it seems odd it would be broken back here, but it could be that the window has, I don't know, the window or something's going on there that's caused him to tape this up in a triangular fashion. And he did a really solid job of it. You know, people are really skillful with tape. I saw one car, I took a picture of it, I don't know where it is now, where somebody had used duct tape to make an entire paint job for their car. I mean, they did a really good job of it too. The whole car is just covered with duct tape. And you can imagine if you were a body man, how much trouble it would be to, rip that stuff off of there and paint that car. But anyway, that's one of the things. New parts counterman. Need a lug nut for a 2007 Corolla. And he says front or rear. That's a true story. I called on the phone. Told the kid, I don't like talking to a parts man I don't know, but since I'm getting something really simple, I'll just give you a try. And he was a young guy. And he called Advanced Auto Parts. That's who I was using at the time at the college. I called over there in the local town. And I says, okay. He says, well, tell me what you need. I said, I need a lug nut for a 2007 Toyota Corolla. He said, front or rear. Now, to be honest, I think what he was doing was filling up the dead air with this question while he clicked to his next screen. He didn't want to pause. And I says, you're scaring the daylights out of me asking front or rear on a lug nut. Now, the lug stud can be different for the front or the rear, not the lug nut. That's ridiculous. And it exposes, when somebody asks a question like that. But sometimes people just say stuff automatically without thinking about how it sounds. And it's embarrassing. I was at Chick-fil-A one day, and I walked in there, and I was going to buy a gallon of their tea. So I went in there, I walked up to the counter, and this pretty girl with glasses on was behind the register. She says, what can I get for you? I says, I want a gallon of half and half sweet and unsweet tea. She said, for here or to go? Really? But that was just an automatic question that rolled out of her mouth without her thinking about the fact that I'm not going to sit there and drink a gallon of tea by myself in Chick-fil-A. But anyway, that's just, not having worked on that side of the parts counter, I can't, tell you that I wouldn't make a mistake like that too. But whenever I was a young teenager and, getting started working on cars, I would go into the most popular parts house in town, and a Napa store, and I knew just about everybody worked there. But there was one guy named Obie that worked there, and he was the brother of the guy who owned the gas station where I was working. And I could go in there, I could say, Obie, I need a solenoid switch for a Chevrolet starter. He'd go to the back, grab one, put it on the counter. Didn't look up anything, just set it out there. And and it always worked. Because most all of those Chevrolet starters back during a certain period of time had the same solenoid switch on them. And they sent different copper spacers and all, depending on the length of the starter body and all that. And so all you had to do was look at the part numbers, you could tell. Well, one day I went in there. He had actually, his brother went to work at the military base doing helicopter work, which he was certified to do, and he came and was in the gas station. And so I had to go up there and get another, solenoid switches failed a lot in those days. So I had to go up there, and this older guy with gray hair stepped up behind the counter, and this guy had never put a wrench on a car, I don't guess. But he'd been a parts man for a long time. And he says, well, I said, I need a solenoid switch for a Chevrolet starter. And he looked around at the other parts guys, and he laughed, and he said, well, here I was, like 16, 17 years old, and he thought I was an idiot. He says, I can't give you a solenoid switch unless you tell me what you're working on so I can look it up, blah, blah, blah. And I said, I told him exactly what I was working on. And he went and put the thing on the counter, and little did he pay attention to the part number was the same. A good parts man is really, really vital to having a good experience. I used to write my part numbers down on one of the parts room at the Ford place if it was a part I used a lot. So anyway, this other guy, when I was working at Ford, sometimes these Escort carburetors would get a piece of trash in them, and it would move around and it would partially block one of the jets, and he'd have issues. He'd cause drivability problems. I don't know where the trash came from, but we'd have to take the top off the carburetor, get that trash out of there, and put a new air horn gasket on there and put the top back on there. So there was a parts guy there. He was sort of a biker looking dude, kind of muscled up, a chunky guy with a beard and glasses and all. His name was James, and he had just come to work there. And there was another guy that worked there, been there a long time, and a transmission mechanic that was standing over talking to him, the other part of the parts counter. And I walked in and said, I need an air horn gasket for an Escort carburetor. And these other parts guys, it was not even their business, but they jumped all in, oh, you gotta have a carburetor number, blah, 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 blah. And I started, they railed and for a while about that. And me and James just stood there and looked at them. When they got through with what they were saying, James says, "What year model is it?" And I said, "It's an '83 model." So he went back and got a carburetor gasket, threw it on the counter. And I walked out there and fixed the car. And later I said, "Why is it that Lewis has to look up every single time?" And he says, "Well," he said, "I'm lazy." And he said, "I noticed there's only two part numbers for Escort carburetor gaskets. One is 82 and prior, and one is 83 and later." And he says, "Since you were working on an 83, there's only one gasket it could be." See, that's a good parts man. Well, the other parts guy feels like he's got to look everything up. Of course, it's always a good idea, too, to make it easy for the parts guy. If you use the same part number a lot, to go in there and just ask for a part number, then he can throw it on the counter and you're gone, while the other guys are asking for that orange thing that's above the valve cover on the left side on whatever your model, you know. One day in 1967 in North Alabama, I was told this story about a guy at a training school, and I was up there in Birmingham or somewhere getting some new model training for Ford. This guy on this 67 Chevelle, he had a 396 and all that, he's driving this thing all over the place. Just up there, just going up and down those long straight roads and making fools out of cops, and he'd go between them and all that when they were trying. They couldn't catch him. He was too fast and all that. And he was just a really hot dog of a driver and all that. And they were talking on the radio about all the trouble they were having. And this old sheriff says, "Let me see what I can do about this." So he came out with this Biscayne, and it had a 3 on the tree with an overdrive transmission. On those, you put it in first and you take off, and then you let off with your gas, and it drops into the, engages the planetary, and you got basically 6 forward gears on those cars. And this guy had a big old 409 engine in that early 60s Biscayne. He had a high-speed rear end in there. And this guy that was driving this Chevelle had this thing wound all the way out as tight as it would go. And this police car was coming up behind him, as Biscayne was. They were both Chevys, see, so this is not a Ford or a Chevy thing. But this guy didn't have overdrive. He just had a 396 and 4 on the floor. So he looked over when this guy was passing him. The cop was passing him. He was as fast as he could go. And he said, "I looked over and I saw that cop reach up and grab his gear shifter, his 3 on the tree gear shifter, and pull it down in high gear. So this cop car passed this Chevelle and still had 2 gears left to go, He says, "I knew I was done, He was outclassed by that cop on that, 5-year-old police interceptor," which I thought was funny as all get out. Look at the abandoned cars. This one here sat out there at the local shopping center for, my goodness, probably 6 weeks. This one sat in the parking lot of our church for a solid month. And I don't know what's going on. It's a really nice car here. Sometimes it's because of it's been, they know it's going to be repossessed, and they'll go park it somewhere where the repo people won't know where to find it. They never drive it anymore, but for spite, they'll park it there. Well, I don't know what this one was. We tried and tried and tried. This one here had a license plate on it from an adjoining county, but I don't know what the deal was. And that, pastor of the church trying to figure out what to do about it. And I said, "Let me see what I can do." So I called the local towing company. Told them, "We got a 385i BMW sitting out here. I don't know what your model is, but it's fairly new. Really nice looking car. Been here a month, abandoned in the church parking lot. Can't get anybody to come and move it and all that." So they came and picked up, and it's gone now. And the wrecker company will basically use the tag number and the VIN number to find out who it is that owned the car. And then they'll get in contact with them, and they say, "We got your car in our bullpen, and it's going to cost you $50 a day until you come pick it up, plus you owe $150 wrecker bill, blah, 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 blah." And if it stays there too long, they put a mechanic lien on it, and then the car becomes theirs, and for the price of what they did to pull up. Anyway, but this is a kind of a funny thing. My uncle was an older man, a great uncle, my mom's uncle. He lived out there on the main highway, and there was a 55 Chevy truck that broke down and was abandoned, not far from his house. And it sat out there for about 3 weeks. Nobody coming back to get it, or they just left it there. And so he called the sheriff's department and he said, this thing's been sitting out here on the road for about 3 weeks, almost a month. He said, I wonder if I could just get it off the road so maybe somebody won't run into it, maybe at night or something. And the sheriff's department said, who cares, Of course, in Alabama, you didn't, before 1975, and even now, if a car's more than 25 years old, you don't have to have a title in Alabama. Now, if it's less than 25 years old, you do, or, newer than 75. And 75 is when you started having to have titles. Because I bought vehicles, that were earlier, newer than 1975 model, and just put the cash in a person's hand and drove away and went to the courthouse and got a tag and all that kind of stuff. In those days, you didn't even have to have insurance if you didn't want to. But anyway, so this, he drags the truck up in the yard by his house, and my cousin, his boy, when he was something of a mechanic, and they tinkered around with that truck and figured out what was wrong with it. I don't know what was wrong with it. And it stayed in his yard for another couple of weeks, and finally he put a for sale sign on it and sold it for $75. And somebody drove away on it. But the thing about it is, when a car has been just parked, and nobody cares what happens to it, Of course, nowadays you got to have a title. Now, the people that pull these cars away, they can actually, because they've got a mechanic's lien on it, they can get a title reissued in their name. See, that's how that kind of thing goes. I was at the grocery store the other day, and I walked by these two dogs that were sitting there just, looking at me when I walked by. Of course, the guy that owned the vehicle opened up the hatch, so they could have some fresh air back there. So they didn't bark or anything, they were just sweet old dogs. But one night, I parked at the gas station, or early morning, I can't remember if it was, but it was before, either right after dark or right before daylight. And this girl parked her car at the gas pump, and she walked into the store. And I noticed there were two dogs over there, and they were watching her walk into the store. And so I was really I was at more of an angle than this. I created this image, but it was a similar situation to this. And I could only see one dog. I could only see the big dog in there looking at her. Couldn't see the little dog. And I made a barking sound, whoo, like that. And when I did, the big dog whipped his head around to see who barked. And I saw the shadow of the other dog inside the car, necking around the big dog to see who barked. But it's really interesting how dogs will react to you when you bark. Sometimes cats will too. But one time whenever I was living in Texas, my landlady, her and her husband had two little boys that were had to go out there. And she said, can you go out there and stand with Brian and Kevin by the road while they're waiting for the school bus? Because I don't want them out there by themselves. And, this was like 1978. I said, yeah, I'll go out there. So I went out there and I was standing there with them. They had a little... They lived in the country, but they were kind of like city boys because they really didn't understand dogs or anything like that. But they had this fluffy little white dog of some kind. So he heads out of the driveway and goes off up the fence line, sniffing around on fence posts and all that. And he ain't going anywhere, but they're thinking he's leaving home, and they're worried they're going to lose their dog, And so they were jumping up and down, saying, hey, come back here. Where are you going? And so one of the things I found out growing up, and I saw another guy do this, you can make barking sounds, woo, woo, like that. And a dog will, if the dog will usually come to you if you'll bark at them, if they're a friendly dog. My dad's dogs, they would come to me when I barked like that. And, and so I barked once, the dog stopped sniffing the post, looked at me, I barked again, and came and went back into the yard. And one of those little kids looked up at me and said, what did you say to him? I still think that's funny every time I think about it. Now about those donuts, whenever you put a donut on the drive axle, whether it's front wheel drive or rear wheel drive, the donut does not need a drive axle. Now an American car can handle this better than a foreign car can. Like on a Honda Civic, if you put that donut on the on one side of the drive axle, part of the car, if it's front wheel drive, you're going to destroy these gears in here. Those little gears right here, they don't do a whole lot unless you're turning, and then they work against each other just a little bit. But this crazy spinning that you're seeing right here, whenever you've got it on the left, you might know, you turn the wheel, they work really fast while you got one wheel turning faster than the other. Sometime when they do turn quicker is like when you're stuck in the mud. You might remember my cousin Vinny, and you talking about that. If you don't have a positive traction rear end, all the torque will be delivered to the wheel that's spinning, and the other one just sits there, and they are doing a lot of work then. But as a general rule, these gears don't do a lot unless you're turning, and they let the outer tire turn, make more turns than the inner tire on a turn, no matter which way you're turning. But if you've got a little tire here and a big tire here, they're going to be just really spinning to beat the band, and it will wear those things out in short order, particularly if you drive it like this a lot. Now, one time when I went and stopped at my father-in-law's house, and we still had it, and we're cleaning out and all. I came home from work, drove 30-something miles and made a detour through the country, stopped out there next to that country store where his house and his barber shop was. And I went through the house and I fed the dog, made sure she had water and all that. I went there. I wasn't gone from my car 5 minutes. Came back out, got in it, noticed I came back out, I had a flat tire. Started to back and I could feel it. And some smart aleck redneck, just for the fun of it, and there was a lot of those guys down in that community that were like this, had stubbed his pocket knife through the sidewall of my tire. And so it was one of my front tires. And I was aware of this gear issue. What you're supposed to do is jack the car up and, change the tire, jack the whole side of the car up and put one of your full-size tires on the end of the drive axle, and then put the donut on the one that just rolls but doesn't have gears in between it. But I didn't do that. I just drove kind of slow back to the town, and I went by Walmart and got another tire put on it, it was just stupid. You see the slip where the guy took his pocket knife in the tire. I don't know who did that or why. I guess they just wanted to laugh at me while I changed the tire, and they probably got a nice giggle out of that. But anyway, don't put that donut on the drive axle. If it's a car like this one here, this guy right here was just working a stew out of those gears, and they're pretty doggone expensive to have the things replaced, and you're going to have them replaced if you drive it a long time with that donut on the drive axle end of the car. 235 cubic inch straight six. I worked on some of these trucks back in the day. But that was a heck of a solid motor right there. Thriftmaster 235. They also had 216 that they put in it. It was not quite as big of an engine. And this was at a car show we had at our church here. But that's the engine that truck had in it. See the way the coils mounted and all that was pretty cool. But they didn't have any spark plug boots on here. Which I thought was very interesting too, because later on we had spark plug boots, and she had this little glass thing on the fuel pump, so it had the filter in it, so you could see, that's where the filter was, so you could see if there was anything in the filter by just looking at it, which was pretty handy. You also had, other than a PCV system, which didn't come out till the early 60s, you had a draft tube, and so all your crankcase pressure would come out this way, and this had an angle cut to it, so when you're going down the road, it would create low pressure in the crankcase, and it would draw the crankcase vapors out. Of course, this never stopped up because it was so huge, so big and fat. But the breather was an oil bath breather. It basically was made so that you have oil puddled in here, and you'd have a filter element, and the air would be forced to go in here and make a quick turn before it went into here. And all of the dirt and everything that was going in there would stay in the oil that was puddled in the bottom of the breather. And then the air would go through the filter and it would be completely cleaned out before it went in there. And Volkswagen Bugs had this kind of a filter on them all the way up until, my goodness, the early 70s. And then they finally put paper air filters on them. But that's just interesting stuff. This truck over here was a cream puff too. The guy said it was a 70 model, but and it may have, this looked like a 69 to me, but the early 70s may have that cross front. That's one of the best trucks Chevrolet ever made right there. But anyway, it's an interesting thing there. This guy I noticed, I took a picture of his truck, he ain't haul much of nothing unless he puts it inside this little bin that he made for himself. Because he got the wheel wells cut out. Now, I don't know what the story behind this was, but that was a very interesting situation there. You put anything in here, it's liable to roll over there, bounce off the tire and out the back. Now, I don't know if it was like that on both sides or not, but one way or another, this is a massive breach back here. Like I say, you see, it looks like he built something here to contain anything that he wanted to haul so it wouldn't find its way out of the truck. But, here, everywhere that there are vehicles and people know how to do things, you know, people will work around. This is a kind of workaround right here. You know, you still can drive the vehicle. It's still a truck, but it's not as functional as it would be if it still had wheel wells here. You know. Now look at this. Here's some severe damage. This one here popped off. I mean, just broke the stud off. That stud right there broke off from here. This one here, right next to it, punched the push rod through the rocker arm. About the only thing I could figure out, my buddy Donnie sent this to me from his shop, and he was showing this to me. About the only thing I could figure out was they must have been super high over revving this thing. I think it was a 4.3 Chevy engine, if I'm not mistaken. Anyway, somebody must have floated the valves so that they hit the piston. The valves, piston hit the valve real hard. But for it to break one and punch this through the other one, that was some catastrophic damage right there. And you know, he had to, of course, I don't know if he ever unraveled exactly why this happened or not, but that was a you almost never see anything like this. Now, if you guys work in a lot of, you know, where there's all these hot rodders out there, you might have seen that. Now, I was a judge at a Skills USA contest one time. I brought my boards that I used to give my students their finals. And I really only needed one board, but I took two, you know, and it was really a bad idea. But what these guys were going to have to do, I got a power supply here, I had to carry that thing about 250 yards under my arm, which was really heavy, because I had to park a long way from the place where we were going to do it. And I would tell these guys to begin with, this was a separate board I've talked about before, but here was their power and ground, and here were jumper wires. And I had a sheet over here where they had to wire up a simple circuit, and they basically had to do, you know, measure the current flow, and they had to, you know, explain why the bulb's resistance. They had to calculate the resistance with the bulb lit, and measure the resistance with the bulb not lit, and then they had to wire up the circuit, turn on the switch, and measure current, and so on and so forth, you know, all kinds of stuff. And so it took you through everything that you could do with a meter. And this other was a relay troubleshooting board, but they had 12 minutes, 10 or 12 minutes to do this. And I just had them doing this one board. And one of those guys, there was only like 2 guys out of a whole bunch of them that even got near to being done with this. But sometimes one of them, I remember specifically, he started connecting power and ground to each side of the switch. And I was not a teacher at that point, I was a judge, and I said, stop. And so he stopped, and I said, unhook your jumper wires and lay them down. And I said, you're done. And he said, what do you mean I'm done? I said, you don't figure it out as you go. If you don't know any better than to hook power to one side of a switch and ground to the other side of the switch, you got big trouble.
This right here is one of the ways you can find a leak here, a misfire. Whoop! You spray a little soapy water around that thing.
Popping.
You can see it popping a spark, see, and the engine starts misfiring.
Got spark breach.
Soapy water is really handy.
Just seeing the light show.
There you go. 409. Spray it on the plug wires, it starts popping.
Just seeing the light show is not enough. You got to hear the engine begin to skip. Now, you're liable to see a little bit of light down there, but if the engine doesn't start skipping when you hit it with the water, you don't need to pay a lot of attention to that, because sometimes you'll actually see some, you know, orange current traveling on that stuff, but it won't misfire. So if you start seeing it pop, spark, and misfire, you know you found it. This flat hose is because of a clogged radiator cap. Basically, it was trying to draw, you know, coolant back in through the degas bottle, or whatever you call it. And this right here, that hose went flat. So if you see a flat hose, you got a problem with that radiator cap. That's what the deal is.
Turn him to the engine's not. So we're going to have him try to spin it over. Go ahead. Oh, go ahead, Dakota. That's spinning. Do it again. See, there's nothing spinning here. So we're spinning there. And it's like the flywheel has completely come loose from the crankshaft.
That one had a busted flywheel. but that's why it wouldn't start.
Push it off.
What you're going to have here is on a hot day, you're going to have this thing start hard. Usually it'll start pretty good in the morning. It's supposed to hold that pressure when you switch off. If that pressure bleeds off that fast and you don't have an injector dripping in the, manifold or something like that, then you're going to have a fuel pump issue. And I used to, even if it just bleeds down kind of slowly, it's still going to cause a hard start problem. That was something that I used to run into in my Explorer. I'm not going to change the fuel pump for this. But whenever you switch on the key and switch it back off, if you see it bleed off, if you got one that say it starts fine when it's cold, but after I park in the parking lot and come back, I got to spin it. What I always would do on my Explorer was turn the key on about 4 or 5 times and pressure up the fuel rail and fire it up. It fired right up, This is an early warning fuel pump check. You can take a current clamp like this one. I got one of these and connect it to your oscilloscope. And you're going to have to be on the wire going to the pump. Anywhere you can get on that wire, and you got to make sure you're on that one. A good pump motor will look like this. A lousy one, that's, even though it's still pumping, it's on the way to failing electrically, and the pump needs to be replaced if you see this. So if you want to do a quick pump check, see how healthy this is the commutator and the brushes that you're seeing bouncing along here. And I had a little briefcase when I was at college, and I had a board in there, and I had 2 pumps on it, one bad, one good. And you can take and hook power and ground up to each one of those pumps and check the pattern. One of the pumps was bad, one was good, and I could actually let the student see this in real time. It was a pretty good little tool there. I don't know if the instructor that's there now still even uses that. I knew what it was for, but there it is. Alright, well, in here, we've been here 37 minutes. This is a kind of a long video. Hope you guys had fun with this. I figured we'd take a break from the tests. And we'll see you guys next week.